the statute annotated. Now, looking this morning at the ordinances, I find support for something that I heard about update on affairs. Right, local is what we were about. I have got a news stack today that I'm ashamed at myself for having prepared so much news, and I'm not going to be able to get to it. But okay, all right. Eric Watson in Bradley County. You want what do we need to think about Eric Watson? Well, there's a story by Judy Walton, the #2 journalist in Chattanooga, about him. At the top of Region page in today's edition, debate: Watson calls PAC fake Christians. Now, yeah, I really don't want to go this. Well, let me just tell you in a nutshell what I'm thinking. These thoughts are just in pencil. Okay, they're not binding on you in any way. They're not conclusory. Okay, but they are provisional thoughts. The attack on Eric Watson in Bradley County is really just shameful. It's shameful because the people who are making it are pretended Christians. They're supposed Christians. Joshua Standifer and his organization is called Accountable Leadership, Christians for Accountable Leadership, in that county, with the connection with an oblique, indirect, and probably statutorily permissible a distance between this group and the candidate, a candidate for office to unseat Eric Watson. That's Steve Lawson in Bradley County. So there's a connection here of not of ideas and planning, but just of people. And the group says that Eric Watson, because he's bringing prisoners to church, that he is he's making a show, right? He's maybe endangering the public, and he is kind of making a show of his Christian convictions. And yet, I think I would warn this organization to be careful about treading in this area, because the scriptures don't allow prisons at all. And in fact, Eric Watson, the sheriff of that county, is acting under a biblical premise, and that is that he has people in church. That the reason, and so the defense for the sheriff is that these people need to hear the gospel. Is there not in any jailing or any sentencing, is there not a rehabilitative interest or claim? At least, well, I would admit there's at least a pretense of rehabilitation, though we know that rehabilitation is only for show. There is no genuine care for the individual inmate or prisoner. He says in Judy's story, she's the #2 journalist in Chattanooga. He says, "I stand on the rock. They can challenge my faith all they want to, but I know one thing, that the inmate program has changed lives, and I'm going to continue it. I'm not going to stop it because of some stupid, ignorant people in this county." And Stanford and Lawson were in a debate Sunday, as Judy was the eyewitness and reporter of that event in Bradley County. Mr. Watson wants to spin this as an attack on his faith, says Joshua Standifer, and that's completely false. This is another instance of him manipulating the public for political gain. He says in an emailed statement to Judy, that's in the Times Free Press today. He goes on to say, an additional example of this was the sheriff's debate on Saturday night. The statement continued. Mr. Watson was allowed to close his debate by asking any question he wanted to, instead of focusing on how Bradley County could be made safer or what improvements could be made to the jail. He attacked innocent civilians in an attempt to clean up his tarnished political image. Well, that's purely rhetorical. That's purely political rhetoric. It is purely manufactured verbosity for making politics, to make a candidate look bad. I'm sure you can make a candidate look bad. The story goes on at the end of it to discuss the abusive jail in Bradley County, a jail whose operation is a criminal enterprise. I would suggest it is a criminal enterprise to operate a jail that way. It's taking state prisoners and having people booked, often on specious paper charges, in that county. Non-criminal offenses that are criminal by custom, not by the fact that the act accused is a sin, right, or a wrong, or that there's any injured party. The sheriff goes on to say, it's always going to be a problem about the jail. It's never going to be solved, according to Judy Walton's reporting, unless we go back to the old days and just take the mattresses away from them and treat them just like they used to in the 1950s and 1960s, where you get the water hose and the fire hydrant and hook it up and just spray them down. That was the old way of doing the shower back in the rough-hewn days of our fabled 1950s. Well, the sheriff needs to know that the scriptures that he lives out and as best he can. The Bible that many people read in Chattanooga and Hamilton County absolutely outlaws prisons. Prisons are forbidden. They are not in the Bible. They are not part of the judicial ethical argument and requirement in the Christian scriptures. They're not there at all. There is in the biblical ethic, the judicial principles, the judicial claims of the word upon human culture and society. There is a judiciary. The state is a judiciary, and that's it. And the judiciary, it has two tools in its toolbox. Okay, I know it's a popular expression used by public policy wonks. One is the capital punishment, and in the scriptures, capital punishment would be imposed on kidnapping, which we have, by the way, police in our day do. Police are guilty of kidnapping often. And Fred Fletcher's police department before David Roddy took over was guilty or is guilty of kidnapping in two instances that we have reported on in detail. Kidnapping is a capital offense. Murder, rape, sodomy, these are capital offenses in the old republic, the old Hebrew republic, right? And then in the biblical ethic, there is the other alternative is not prison, but there is restitution. And so if it's a non-capital offense, every wrong is made right under the lex talionis. Italian, I'm trying to remember now the word Italian. Lex talionis is the biblical concept of equal justice, right? Fair justice. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, stripe for stripe, wound for wound, limb for limb, wounding for wounding. That is lex talionis. In other words, if you are wronged by a stripe, then the perpetrator has to be given a stripe or its equivalent, and that's the old biblical republic in among the children of Israel had that, and that's why it was such a just society, and that's why it was a place for worldwide immigration in that earlier period before Christ. It was a hotbed to go as visitor and people who moved there to live there in a just society. Caleb, for example, Kenizzite he was not an Israelite at all. He was a Kenizzite and became a leader of the people. Uriah the Hittite. Remember, who were the Hittites? Well, they were extinguished by the Israelites, and yet he was King David's faithful retainer. But anyway, that is the biblical judicial ethic. And Sheriff Eric Watson in Bradley County, though he may not have thought about it, he is actually following that theory. And so there has to be restitution. And if there's no prison in the biblical ethic, well, then where is restitution made? Is it made in a purposeless confinement in a prison? No, it's made in public. It's made in society. So an offender, one who has done wrong, a tortfeasor, a tortmonger, one who has committed a wrong, he lives out his restitution in public. He's making good. He's making himself productive. He's using his hands to produce value, to pay the restitutionary agreed upon amount. That is what happens. And so in old Israel and in some parts of America, very few courts here and there, influenced perhaps by the arguments of Chuck Colson, for example, or the Reconstruction wing of Christianity. Those are very influential organizations and groups where they have had an influence. There has been this interest in restitution, and here Sheriff Watson is having these men hear the gospel. Yes, they've committed wrongs. Yes, they are serving sentences, but they're ones who want to hear the gospel, and that is where. That is the biblical ethic, where in restitution is it's being made in public, paying back the wrong. The victim's rights at center, right? The victim's rights are at center in that jurisprudence. You live your life in public, and so you go to church, and here we have the sheriff taking prisoners to church, people whom Judy Walton our number 2 journalist identifies as having committed crimes, right? Great wrongs done, and they are now at worship. And here, a group calling itself Christians for Accountable Leadership are suggesting that somehow it's unaccountable, and that it's just a bit of political casuistry for Sheriff Watson to have these men who are either Christians or wanting to be Christians or wanting to hear about the gospel attend a worship service on the Lord's Day, the first day of the week, traditionally the one in which Christians have worshiped God. They've the day of rest, having shifted from Saturday to the first, from the last day to the first day. Now, to get to my point, I was going to talk about administrative notice. Administrative notice is something that the city and the county here in Hamilton County and Chattanooga are under. They are under administrative notice. And as I was looking at the ordinances this morning in Chattanooga, I came across, I would say, not important verification of these claims, but colorful and helpful. Administrative notice in Chattanooga and Hamilton County has determined the following. This is a new story, so if you're not following it, it's going to sound a bit mystifying, but just forgive me, okay? Forgive me. And you can find out more about it by going to Nooganomics.com, Nooganomics.com. And also, you can find out more about it at yournews.com, yournews.com, our sponsor. It's called administrative notice. And what I've found out in giving this notice to our local officials for your benefit, yours, is this. There is a distinction in the law between travel and transportation, and, and that police and sheriffs routinely enforce the transportation statute against people who are not involved in transportation. They are simply travelers. They're using the roads privately for private purposes in their own roles as natural human beings for their own pleasure. And they're not subject to the transportation rules. This is what administrative notice has discovered. And that was me making the discovery just by doing that boring reading and also now publishing my report. That is what I do. David Tulis here, Nooga Radio 92.7 FM. David Tulis is my name, the blogger with the biggest pen, the tower on the top of Signal Mountain. And I've found in the city charter this distinction, and it is this, that the city has the authority to regulate and tax and license all vehicles, quote, held out to the public use for hire within the city. Okay. That is, if you're involved in a vehicle for hire in Chattanooga, you are subject to this provision on page 2 of Title 2 of our city charter. And the city has the power to license, to tax, to regulate taxi cabs, automobiles for hire. Okay, got that? Automobiles for hire, trucks and buses, and to fix a rate to be charged for the carriage of persons and property by any vehicle held out to the public use for hire within the city, and to require indemnity bonds and the like. Now, this story is, by the way, available at yournews.com. Yournews.com. If you're ending up with in Atlanta, just click Chattanooga. Yournews.com Chattanooga. That's me. That's us. Us here, David Tulis, Nooga Radio 92.7. And it is very interesting to see that there is that distinction in the law. So listen, if you are involved in transportation, subject to regulation, you have to have your license, your proof of tax paid, right? You have to have your registration in commerce and proof of insurance, which is compulsory on all those involved in transportation, but not administrative notice suggests upon others.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3